Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links deck profile. Today we're taking a look at Noodles. Noodle Ninjas have just gotten some new support and a new skill, and we've been testing this deck like crazy in a couple of events and on the ladder, and we did actually manage to get a 16 win streak with this exact list. So I can tell you this deck at the very least has legs. But let's go over the skill Noodle Art Reboot, which is actually pretty good. This skill can only be used if all the level 5 or higher monsters in your deck are fire attribute pyro effect monsters with 0 defense and or all normal monsters are pyro type. So this is written a bit weirdly, but basically any level 5 or higher monster on a deck, if it's an effect monster, has to be fire attribute pyro type monsters with 0 defense, and all normal monsters have to be pyro type. Requirement none. Effect, we can choose one face up level 5 or higher monster on our field. It gains 600 attack to the end of this turn. Now, first off, that level 5 monster is almost always going to be Pyro, but if we do manage to take control of one of our opponent's monsters using something like an Essel, we can use it on that monster instead. And the 600 attack boost is also very similar to Servant of Dawn. This is a very Servant of Dawn type effect. Then, if it was a level 7 or higher monster that was summoned this turn, you can add one Pyro normal monster with 1300 or less attack from your graveyard to your hand. So this is where the skill gets really good. Being able to add a body back to your hand is really, really strong. So we can summon it out and just have it as a 1300 body, which we could then boost with like our spice, or we could summon it out and tribute it off, or we could summon it and then use extra spice's effect to sacrifice it off. So extra spice is our brand new boss monster. I guess we'll go over that now. 2400 attack is pretty good. 0 defense kind of sucks. But requirement, we can send one face up pyro type normal monster from our field to the graveyard to inflict 1000 damage to our opponent and draw one card. Now this is a really good effect to get to our opponent's life points because this deck really does not have any kind of direct attacking, we don't have piercing, we don't have any way to destroy things, we can't change battle positions, so extra spice is our best way to burn our opponent through set 3 pass. And drawing a card is also really, really good, as well as the fact that with Noodle Art Reboot, it will boost its attack up to 3000, which is very, very relevant as that lets us attack over most monsters, as well as get through most combat tricks, the most common of which is going to be the counter pigeons. And if this goes up to 3000 attacks into counter pigeons, it will lose 800 attacks. It's level 8 down to 22, and that will still clear over our Harpy Lady Sisters. So very, very good. Then our other boss monster is Spice the Elite Noodle Ninja. This card has been out since Rush Duel came to Duel Links, and it hasn't really done too much, but with the skill, this card now becomes a lot better. The main issue this card's always had is that if you draw early in the game, it's difficult for this thing to get above 2400 attack. Using Noodle Art Reboot, we can instantly put this up to 2800 attack before it's even used its skill, which is very, very good. But requirements, send the top card of the deck to the graveyard. All face-up pyro-type monsters on your field gain attack equal to the number of normal monsters in your graveyard times 100 until the end of this turn, which is really good. On top of the fact that if we do use Noodle Art Reboot, we can guarantee grab back a 1300 body and then slap that down next to it, and then we have immediately a target to boost with our Spice the Elite Noodle Ninja, so we can get multiple monsters affected by this effect, which is really good. The reason we're only on one extra spice and 3 copies of regular spice is because extra spice is a really good card. I do really like this card, but this is better in like a slow control type of game, whereas spice is better at kind of OTKing your opponent. And I've always said this, I think extra spice is a more consistent card, but Spice the Elite Noodle Ninja wins games. And obviously what we want to do is win games. Next up we have Seahorse Carrier. So we decided to include the Aqua engine in this deck, and that's because the Aqua engine requires the smallest amount of cards to be a functioning engine. Seahorse Carrier is also not a bad card in the sense that we can use it when we have other monsters on the field, which a lot of the other engines kind of lack that ability. They have to be the only monster on the field. As well as Kanan is a decent body with 1400 attack, and it does let us make more aggressive plays when we want to. Next up, we have Rising Light Angel Essel. This is a bit of a divisive one. I've actually been thinking about cutting this card, and I'll go over that in a little bit, but this card is still really good. During the turn you have not special summoned a monster, send the top 2 cards of your deck to the graveyard. Then if you activate this effect during the first turn of the player going second, you can special summon one monster from either player's graveyard face up to your field, which is always going to be really good. If we manage to bring back our extra spice, our spice, or our Cyberse, this is really good value. On top of the fact we could just bring back a body and then tribute that body off to get out one of our boss monsters anyway. We can also, in rare situations, grab back one of our opponent's monsters and then use our Noodle Art Reboot on it. So that is a little combo we can sometimes do. But the primary reason this is in here is to turbo the graveyard, because we have a lot of cards in here that we really want in there, such as Kanan to get back with the Seahorse Carrier, or any of our normal monsters to be brought back with Noodle Art Reboot, and to fuel the amount of normal monsters in there for Spice the Elite Noodle Ninja. So this card is just really good for that reason. The reason we're thinking about cutting it is twofold. One, this deck can struggle to get through set 3 pass. That's one of the deck's major weaknesses. And Rising Light Angel Essel makes us closer to decking out, and if your opponent is able to stall us out for a long period of time, we can just deck out, and that is one of this deck's, I don't want to say primary lose conditions, but it does come up. As well as the fact that even when we do get one of these boss monsters, outside of an extra spice the Elite Noodle Ninja, a lot of these other boss monsters aren't going to be doing too much on turn 1, since your opponent is most of the time going to be setting 3, so we don't have like a big tempo play to make that we would if we got something like a Trigger Drago or something like a Dragius, something that can really get in there and hurt your opponent. So Rising Light Angel Essel I think does devalue a little bit because of that. Our legend monster of choice is Archfiend Soldier, and that's because unless we have a Pyro Legend, which we don't, it has to be a level 4 or lower, and this is the best statted level 4 or lower monster. It's a normal monster as well, so it does have some synergy with the deck with things like Spice. Next up we have Flame Cerberus. 2100 attack, 1 tribute, not bad. 1800 defense, also very relevant and does come up. With Noodle Art of Reboot, this card does become 27, which is very, very good. It just lets us clear over pretty much anything. Unfortunately, it doesn't easily attack through battle traps, but battle traps aren't too popular right now, so that shouldn't matter too much, as well as the fact that this still will crash into a Harpy Lady Sisters that is protected with a counter pigeon, so there's at least that. I think Flame Cerb is really starting to come into its own, especially since we've been seeing the Servant of Dawn skill really pop off, and this has been kind of the primary monster that you want to boost up with that skill, so Flame Cerb really does work in this deck very similarly to how it works in the Servant of Dawn deck. Next up we have Kanan, who is in here again, just be right with Seahorse Carrier. Then we have our Fire Pyro monsters. We have Fyaru, we have Flavor Inspector, and we have Stock. So Fyaru is obviously the best one because that's the highest defense, plays around things like Sword and Shield the best. Then it's obviously Flavor Inspector, even though it's 0 defense, and then Stock is in here just for consistency reasons. We just wanted one extra monster to make sure that we can get something back using Noodle Art Reboot. So for our spell and traps, we have Shield and Sword, and this is obviously always going to be a really, really powerful trap card. This card can sometimes let you just steal games. If your opponent's playing very low defense, such as 0 defense, such as our boss monsters, for example, we can just flip them over, clear their big boss monsters, get in for a ton of direct damage, and like I say, we can just steal games that we really shouldn't have had any business winning with this card, which is why I really like it. But I do also think that Monster Reincarnation is also a really fantastic card, and I will be further testing this in the future. One thing to remember is this is just our day 1 build. Again, we did get a 16 win streak with it, but this is far from perfected, and I do plan to test it with Monster Reincarnation in the future, because although I think you can get bigger blowouts with Shield and Sword, I think Monster Reincarnation will make the deck more consistent. Next up, Ghost Cyclone. So we'd rather have the Pyro back row hate card, but we don't have access to that yet, so we're going to have to use Ghost Cyclone for now, but Ghost Cyclone's still pretty good. If we do manage to get the draw, that's fantastic. If not, it's a little bit awkward to use because I feel it has to be empty, but we can still pop back row, which is still really useful, and if we can pop our opponent's widespread, we'll be in a fantastic position. Next up, Talismanic Seal Array. So this is a bit of an awkward inclusion. That's because I think Talismanic Seal Array is really good. I think it's the easiest card of its type to really be used effectively, even though it does have a little anti-synergy with the deck. So Talismanic Seal Array is really good at dealing with huge monsters, especially maximum monsters, as this deck, outside of just boosting a ton, can't really deal with maximums too easily. Also, by reducing a monster's attack, we can make them have very low attack, and our deck is basically a big damage deck that wants to just punch your opponent as hard as they can, so getting in more damage is always going to be really useful. The anti-synergy comes in with the fact that this card shuffles cards from our graveyard back into our deck, and a lot of the cards in our graveyard want them to stay there, such as Kanan or any of our normal monsters. We want them to stay there for Noodle Art Reboot, and we want them to stay there because we want as many in there as possible for Spice the Elite Noodle Ninjas effect. So there is a little bit of anti-synergy there. But we can also use this to get back cards like Seahorse Carrier, Spice the Elite Noodle Ninja, and Extra Spice back into our deck to be reused later. So I still think there is a lot of good uses for this card, and I think this feels like the most consistent of this type of card. Now, the alternative cards we could have in this slot would be the Noodle Art of Savory, which I also think is a very good card, but the issue with this card is it's generally never going to be as good as Talismanic Seal Array because this card caps out at 1200 reduction, but because we're playing more than just Pyro monsters, sometimes this will only be an 800 reduction. Now, we don't have to pay a cost, which is pretty good. We don't have to shuffle our graveyard back into our deck, but it's going to be a little bit awkward for us to do something meaningful with just an 800 reduction. Whereas if Talismanic Seal Array hits a level 7 monster, it's going to be 14. If it hits a level 8, it'll be 16. If it hits a maximum, it will reduce it by 2000, which is a lot bigger numbers. The only other card we would put in this slot would be the Noodle Art of Roastery. And this is a card, again, I do want to test more in the future. So if you have a face-up level 7 or higher Pyro-Attack monster on your field, all face-up Pyro-Attack monsters on your field gain attack equal to the number of normal monsters in both players' graveyards times 100 until the end of the turn. Now I was testing this card out a bit, and I kept finding that whenever I would have this card, I would only have things like Flame Cyberse out, which is not a level 7, which means you can't actually activate the Noodle Art of Roastery. But after talking to some other high-level players, they have found great success with this card, so in future I will be testing this again. So again, just to re-clarify, this is still our day 1 deck and still needs additional refinement, so we will be testing this in the future, but so far, this is the list that we've had the most success with the Talismanic Seal Array. Next up we have Widespread Ruin. Again, the best trap card in the game, arguably the best card in the game. This card can still just win games entirely on its own, and that's why we always have to include it in every single list. And then finally, we are on Music Princess's Recital. So this card is pretty good. This card can save our lives and is one of the best trap cards that we can use in almost every situation. This card can also be a deterrent to Shield and Sword. If we're not immediately dead from the first 2 attacks, we can stop the 3rd attack on our monster and survive. And that is basically the primary reason this is in here. If you do have the Buffered Slime trap card from the bundle, this could just as easily be that card. I think that card is really, really strong. And it's really good at protecting us through something like a Shield and Sword play, which otherwise we would just get attacked directly effectively 3 times, which is really bad. Speaking of Buffered Slime, it's actually one of the best cards to counter this deck as well. A lot of our monsters want to just get really big and have one big turn of smashing your opponent in the face and trying to OTK them. And if your opponent does have Buffered Slime, they can effectively blank all of that damage, which puts an end to our turn, which is very disappointing. Another one of the big counters is obviously going to be Shield and Sword, because a lot of our monsters have 0 defense or very low defense, which is why Flame Cerberus's 1800 defense is so important, and same with Faiari's 1000 defense. For the same reason, Sword and Shield also kind of count as this deck, which is disappointing, but if we do get 2 activations of Spice, we can boost our attack high enough oftentimes that Sword and Shield won't be too detrimental to us, especially since a lot of the time our opponents will be lowering their attack as well with that card, unless they're playing something like a Yami Ruler. So it's not too bad, but it still does hurt the deck. Other than that, this deck's major weakness, which we've already been over a little bit, is getting through set 3 pass. In the past, we were testing out Pierce and we were testing out Stop Defense, but these cards are really, really pivotal to the game, like 1 in 5 games. And 4 in 5 games, these cards do nothing. So it's very awkward to fit them in, especially since the spell trap spots are so tight in this deck. So I really don't think I can afford to fit Stop Defense or Pierce into this final build. We just have to try and force our opponent into attacking us. The issue is the only way we have to do that right now is extra Spice. So in a lot of ways, I feel like this deck has similar weaknesses to what the Royal Rebel deck has, especially if not using Hell Tuning Invasion. So set 3 still can be a bit of a problem. But other than that, this deck is very, very powerful. We can get massive boards of ridiculously high attack. We can clear through just about anything. We can get tons of damage in if our opponent does have attack mode monsters. And I really think this deck could be a real sleeper hit that could bust its way into the meta. Right now, I would say this is a high tier 3/low tier 2 deck, but with a bit more refinement and a few more tournament results, I could see this pushing its way up to mid tier 2, which I personally would love to see, as I've always had a soft spot for the Noodle Ninjas. So just a couple of other cards I've seen other people running. Some people are playing the Beast Engine with Paku Pakuchu and Gazelle. Now we were playing a couple of Gazelles at one point just because it was a decent statted monster and we just wanted more aggression and normal monsters. But being able to fit in Paku Pakuchu as well, I think is going to be a little bit tight, but other people have found success with it, so that is another option. The Guard, again, is not bad, but it doesn't really help against something like Sword and Shield, which is why we don't really want to include it. As well as I've also seen some people have success with King's Majesty, because again, we're not playing any of the Limit 3 cards, so we could include this, as well as some Babysitter Goats, and have that as a small engine, which could work again, because the deck does just want normal monsters in it. It will just make it a little bit less aggressive and a little bit more defensive. But again, overall, I'm quite happy with this list. Again, 16 win streak with it, so it's got legs for sure. But let's find some replays so I can show you what I've been talking about.
参ります。ラッシュデュエル。参ります。ラッシュデュエル。 参ります。ラッシュデュエル。参ります。ラッシュデュエル。ラッシュデュエル。